he put into war, prisoners of war, women and children, then you cannot abrogate this, you cannot say it doesn't exist. However, my own position on the matter is with the majority, because I'll tell you why. It makes sense if there's a maqsad of Sharia, which is an objective of Sharia, which almost everyone agrees that freeing slaves was a maqsad of Sharia. It does that, you don't do mukhalafa of that maqsad. And by the way, Ash-Shatibi,
I don't know what that means. You don't do.
Oh, sorry. You don't go against the objective which you've already, which there has been progress in achieving.
Okay.
So, if you read the book called Al-Muwafaqat,
I mean, I wouldn't agree that there's it's established that there's this objective to end slavery.
But no, but that's what
that's
what the jurists say.
They're taking in.
No. That's what the jurists. Al-Ghazali says this. Many of the jurists of and remember, these are medieval jurists that came way before the modern era, before liberalism, before anything. This is not an apologetic approach. This is the approach of medieval scholars who looked at the nusus, the textual evidences, and came to this conclusion based on what all of the nusus or the textual evidences are pushing us towards.
Many of those scholars bought slaves themselves, though.
Yes, they bought slaves, but remember, they did so in an area where there was already slavery. There was no abolition movement. Okay. Yes, so we're talking about today. That's what you said, right? We were talking about in today's context. Okay. So what I'm saying to you is, in today's context, where there have been legal abolitions, like in 1807 in England, in 1867 in America, and so on, and the majority of the world, I think almost all the world now, has agreed that slavery should be outlawed. In that context is a different context to the medieval context, which already had slaves everywhere.
Okay.
And in that, there will be two rulings. That context has a ruling, and this context has a ruling. Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, gun laws in America. Yeah. Why don't they abolish the buying of guns?
I don't know.
Why? Because
to defend themselves, they think they should have the right to bear arms. But that's another issue.
No. It relates perfectly. Actually, you know why? Because the thing is, if you look at gun laws, how many people get killed in America by these mass shootings? Yeah. So why do they not abolish is it the Second Amendment? What is
Second Amendment, yeah.
Why don't they abolish it?
There are various
because you know why? There will be riots. People, they're not going to give up their guns. Okay. So at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, slavery, it wasn't something that was introduced like this. You're going to get rid like that.
Yeah, I explained this to him. Yeah.
So exactly, do you not see the correlation where in today's time, where we're living today, where they can see mass people in slavery,
yes,
at least people where the Prophet ﷺ would treat them right, clothe them how he clothed them, yeah? Here people are dying at the hands of people who own guns, yeah? Not all of them, but they do not abolish it. Why? Because people will start causing riots.
Okay, but
you know what I'm saying? So do you not see?
Well, the thing is, there are other times when people said there needs to be a gradual introduction of a law like alcohol, for example.
Yes.
And yes, I don't see in the Quran things saying slavery is from the devil, like they say about alcohol and gambling.
No, you're right. You're right.
There isn't that sort of. There isn't a trajectory kind of clearly condemning it that I see in the Quran.
Yes, that's a valid point. I'll tell you why that's a valid. No, let me explain. No, you've made you're definitely saying something correct there. In essence, here's what we say, right? In essence, the interaction between person and person, okay, that can take different forms. Now, the thing is, the interaction I have with you right now is we're equals. Hopefully, according to the law and stuff like that. Obviously, I have a very I have advantages. I'm joking. I'm sure you have advantages as well. Now, the point I'm saying is that it's an equal relationship. Relationships in and of themselves, if they're based on, let's say for example, the Quran says, let me be completely honest about this, وَجَعَلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ فَوْقَ بَعْضٍ دَرَجَاتٍ لِيَتَّخِذَ بَعْضَهُم بَعْضًا سِخْرِيًّا or سُخْرِيًّا. There's two qira'ahs. That we have allowed some people to be placed above and beyond other people, so that those individuals can take them as sukhriya, which means in other words, they can use them. Now, the idea is that is an allowance, a Quranic allowance. In the slavery or the relationship between slave owner and slave, let's say, or the indentured servant and the master, is as exploitative, arguably as exploitative as a relationship between an employee and an employer, depending on how that is framed. No, it can be.
I know.
In a capitalist society.
At the point it is, you would call it slavery, but an
yeah.
employee in today this society isn't a slave, though.
No, it depends on the context. So, for example, if you have someone working for a transnational corporation, yeah, like they do in China, or let's say in Bangladesh, yeah,
possibly.
like Primark.
Okay.
Primark has a thing in Primark, right?
All right. I won't kind of speak about like kind of exploitative working conditions. Those are bad as well. Maybe you could call some of those factories slavery, okay? But in the UK, like to say like, oh no, you work for Coca-Cola or you work for
not
Starbucks,
in the UK. I haven't made this thing about Starbucks being a slave.
Okay,
I'm talking about.
Some people might think you're talking about.
No. So what I'm saying is that since the idea of an exploitative relationship ranges, the idea of that relationship itself depends on the interactions and the parameters. So if the interactions are inherently exploitative, then that is a bad relationship. That is a haram relationship. That's a wrong relationship. But in and of itself, the existence of a superior or an inferior or someone higher and lower, the Quranic discourse doesn't say that as a concept is a wrong thing. Because I have more money than you. Because if you take that thought to its logical extreme, you do have Marxism. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Because if one says that the reason why slavery is wrong is because of the hierarchy between two people, right? Then if that is the ultimate reason why it's wrong,
I wouldn't make that argument.
Right, but because there's a power dynamic between the two and there's a hierarchy, there's a higher and a lower. If that's the reason why it's wrong, we are saying it's wrong because of other reasons. Yes, because of the interactions.
Yes,
if that's the reason,
like slavery in general is wrong because
of the interaction, exploitations.
That person doesn't have freedom. That person doesn't have the right to.
But that's a different. Okay, freedom. By the way,
well, because the slavery in
the term is the same, but it's not the same thing.
No, the kind of slavery practice.
What comes to your mind?
Well, I mean, are you gonna? So are we going to talk about slavery in Islamic history or slavery according to what Muhammad did? Because sometimes you've gone to just what Muhammad did, sometimes you talk to kind of like the rulings of medieval jurists. So within medieval Islamic
but the medieval
history,
jurists, they refer back to what the Muhammad Sallallahu did.
But
they're just trying to find out what Muhammad did.
But it's not in itself like hold on, let me fix it first. At most it's like a proxy though. It's not in itself kind of. I think if the central issue is what Muhammad did and what he said was okay, his teachings and so on, then at that time, so at that time, like you would be someone who you could be ordered to do labor. If you're a slave belonging to someone, they could order you to do labor, and there's evidence of Muhammad doing that. He like told one of his slaves to carry luggage, for example, and also within Muhammad's time you could buy and sell people, so they were your property, okay, and so and that is like a violation of freedoms, and so I don't think we would call that merely like an employee relationship.
Perfect. No, I agree. Now that what you've done there, I've listened to what you're saying, and what you've employed really is a liberal framework. So in other words, for you, the best thing that you can have is freedom. And if those freedom,
that's not it.
Right. So if freedoms are transgressed,
freedom is one good thing.
No problem. But how can you prove that?
Do you really need to go there?
We really do, because that's your presupposition.
But before, okay, but like before we go to like why are things?
Can I explain something? Sorry, one thing. There's a liberal thinker called Nozick. I'm not sure if you've heard of him.
No, I haven't.
Nozick talks about freedom. Okay. And the discussion of freedom is actually a deep intellectual academic one. My postulation today to you is that freedom as a concept has been abused, right? And it's not used in the correct way. Some in my opinion, that freedom that you're talking about doesn't actually even exist.
You don't know exactly what freedom I'm talking about.
All right. Okay. So what? Can you explain what freedom is? Yeah.
So I'd say.
What is freedom?
Human rights, for example, would be a good example of the human rights documents or that sort of thing. United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. That would be something that I have a large degree of agreement with. I wouldn't say that freedom is the ultimate good thing, or like we should achieve freedom beyond anything else. There are other good things that should be improved, like reducing human suffering.
What's freedom? What's the definition of freedom?
It's
yes.
I can't remember. It'd be like lack of coercion, I guess.
Okay. Brilliant. Self-determination.
Yeah.
What would you want? How do you want to define freedom?
I'd probably go along with how it's defined in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, if it is mentioned in there.
I don't think it is actually.
But like, without being able to specifically kind of point to one definition, I can say that like kind of this limitation of freedom by an owner, someone who owns someone and can like sell them as property and order them to do labor, that would be, you know, that would be bad because it violates people's human rights, violates their freedoms.
For me, okay, I'll be completely honest with you. In 1948, as you said, this new term, and it was a new term, of human rights was coined. Before that, the word natural law or natural rights was the common term that was used in academics and also written in books. If you go to Google Ngram and you write the words, Google Ngram is a really interesting tool, by the way.
That?
Yeah, so it shows you what the keywords in books are in different time periods from the 1800s. Yeah, so if you write down, and I urge people that are watching this as well to do the same thing, write down the phrase human rights on Google Ngram, you'll find that there's a spike in 1948 from when that term was used. Now, human rights as a concept, therefore, with all 30 articles as written in the convention, this is quite new, okay? Now, it would seem to be an egregious anachronism to use such a post-World War II kind of document to try and refer to medieval practices. I think that would be problematic.
But sometimes it seems like you say that you should go back. We should go back to. Sometimes it seems like you say that we should go back to these medieval practices, and then sometimes you say like, kind of, oh, now in this day and age, slavery shouldn't be legal. But when you say that, you're actually benefiting from the achievements that kind of liberal, humanist, and secularist thinkers and societies.
I think you're wrong about that. I think I think
coercing Muslim countries to stop slavery and to make slavery be
that's absolutely
worldwide.
What you said there is quite frankly ahistorical, because if you look at, for example, John Locke, John Locke, who talked against slavery in his books, The Two Treatises of Governments, he's a liberal, he's the founding father of liberalism, was in fact someone who was a colonial. He justified colonialism, and in fact,
we aren't obliged to kind of defend any single person's entire corpus. We don't follow a cult of personality.
Can I explain? Something?
To any sort of religious beliefs to try and justify any single person.
No problem. We
can say as a thinker has good ideas, and then
no problem.
And these are his
but
bad
what you
ideas.
said was that liberal people coerce Muslims to free slaves. What I'm telling you is
maybe they shouldn't be called liberals. Let me
correct you.
Let's call them the West.
No, let me correct you. Liberalism itself allowed slavery in abstraction, in conception, and in practice. And liberal governments from when America was established in 1776 all the way up until this time have practiced slavery in the most racist way possible. So I don't know how you can say that fine. Now they forced us to say the free the slaves. It didn't work like that.
Fair enough. Let's call it secular humanists.
So no. What I'm saying,
benefited from the work of secular humanists.
We haven't benefited from anyone. We in fact have been the receiving end.
No, because
we've been the colonized.
Muslim countries wouldn't have abolished slavery until kind of the
but you're confusing.
Kind of Western powers started kind of pressuring and persuading other countries to abolish slavery.
But those Western powers, those Western powers themselves justified slavery for hundreds
earlier in the time,
No, not only earlier in the time, they're continuing to justify it.
How can you justify it when you've abolished it legally?
Well, they continue to justify it. Well, even after the abolition, 1807 in this country and 1867 in America, do you think that the whole discussion was muted? Do you think that the whole discussion was muted?
So, are you saying
no?
That
what I'm saying is
there are
You've used key terms and you've unjustifiably used them. You've used terms like liberal, secular, humanist. Now, I don't know why. Let's define those terms. Liberalism. Okay, there's nothing inherent within liberalism which disallows slavery outright if a social contract would allow it, and or if there's an economic benefit to a particular nation, as was the case, as was justified by the Americas, and by those proponents of slavery within using the framework of liberalism.
No, there isn't like a book or a figure within liberalism who you can say this is the canon. Okay, so there'll be a range of opinions within liberalism.
I accept it, but what I'm saying to you is it's conceivable using liberal thought. My argument is as follows: it is as conceivable, and I want you to try and disprove this. It is as conceivable within liberalism, within humanism, and within secularism to justify slavery of the kind that you are against, as conceivable as through an Islamic system. The only difference is, and I'll explain to you how I can prove this, the only difference is with the Islamic system, there was an inbuilt mechanism that made it as an objective of the Sharia to do away with slavery as an institution. There is no inbuilt mechanism within liberalism which persuades political leaders to do the same thing. And if there was, then my question is, historically, how comes we didn't see that? How comes the founding fathers of America all owned slaves? Mm-hmm. Do you think that they were illiterate in the field and understanding of liberalism? George Washington had slaves, you see? Yeah. I mean, was he an illiterate person? Did he not know? Yeah. He was the one who was taking in the liberal ideas. So not only were liberal philosophical thinkers justifying colonialism, which is a kind of slavery, by the way, because colonialism is like slavery, to be honest with you, yes? They were justifying it. They were giving their governments the go-ahead, the philosophical go-ahead. But then you had those political leaders who would act upon that, and the populace, the masses, the liberal, secular, humanist masses that would act upon that. So I think it's a little bit unfair. I think you must admit it's unfair to say, well, after all this reform that the white man has done, which in fact it wasn't reform but was exploitation for 400, 500 years, now, and we forced you Muslims to free your slaves. No, it wasn't like that. Yeah. What happened was that you put us into slavery, you colonized us, and then after that you realized for economic reasons that slavery was not something which was tenable, maintainable, or sustainable in the economic system. And that's why in America there was a war, because the South was benefiting more than the Northeast in terms of economic slavery. And because the Industrial Revolution was taking a turn and certain economic things were happening. So the reason why abolition of slavery took place was not because the white man realized that slavery was incompatible with humanism, secularism, or liberalism, was because the white man couldn't afford slavery anymore. That was the reason why slavery ended. Nothing to do with liberalism, my friend. Trust me, they used liberalism as a way to colonize the people, as a justification for it. John Locke, J.S. Mill, all of those people were in charge of advising governments how to deal with the colonized, how to deal with the black man. David Hume was a racist. Okay, Immanuel Kant.
Can we do with some of the claims you've made so far? Because if you make 30 claims, I might forget some of the earlier ones.
But do you retract that statement that, because this trajectory, sorry to say, but this white man's history, that we must be the white savior that saved you Muslims from enslaving those individuals, and enslaved you, the developing people and brown people, from annihilating yourselves and destroying and exploiting the world, when in fact we know that the white man was responsible to a large extent, not all white people of course, but the Western elite was responsible for this institution, and it was done in a way which, if only they had taken in some of the Islamic principles.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, so first of all, you're defining kind of liberalism, or you're using the term in a very particular way, kind of really quite an anachronistic way, because people who are liberals today aren't going to follow every word that John Locke wrote or every word that the founding fathers wrote.
Yes, I agree.
We aren't in a kind of cult of personality whereby kind of because one person is considered authoritative, we have to defend their entire corpus. Okay,
absolutely.
So we follow the good ideas that they had, and where those ideas were even hypocritical to their actions, the good ideas will stand by themselves. Okay, so good ideas with respect to kind of human rights and with respect to abolitionists and respect to humanist values.
Yes.
Those are what are followed by liberals today. Okay,
there's a reverb
and as for the
I'll speak to him. Sure. Yeah.
As for whether I should take back this idea that kind of the Western world kind of encouraged Muslim countries to abolish slavery. That's what happened. That's the actual truth.
No, the actual truth. The Quran done that 1400 years ago.
Then why were Muslim countries so slow to the mark then? Because
Yes.
if your Muslim countries, you had more Islam in your minds and being acted out than Westerners, so you should have had a head start towards abolishing slavery compared to the West, and yet it didn't happen that way. Like it was the Ottoman Empire first abolished it, and then after the Ottoman Empire was disestablished, various previous Ottoman countries like Egypt and like Saudi Arabia and like Iraq kind of like started doing slavery again, and then they later kind of started making it illegal in the 1920s or the 1960s, again under pressure of the rest of the world at that point. So that's maybe you're going to say, oh, but that has nothing to do with Islam, but I think it probably does, because it's a continuation of this culture and example of Muhammad and his rightly guided caliphs and his companions and the Sahaba, of what they did. Okay, and what were some of the other claims that you made? Well, yeah, basically, kind of, I'll agree with you that the the American founding fathers and several other people in kind of European history, they had ideas that are totally objectionable and awful, but we aren't obligated to follow them. That isn't how kind of liberalism works. And I contrast it at this point with Islam, because I'd say that unlike liberalism, Islam is a cult of personality where you are obliged to try and defend every single action or teaching that Muhammad is reported to have done. Like I've seen in this park countless times, where they try and say, oh, when the Muslims enslaved the Banu Mustalik, they were doing it for their own good, to protect them from the harsh desert environments. I don't know about those
discussions, but
okay, still, it's like under the Islamic kind of. The verse is like, oh, you are of most exalted character, talking about Muhammad, or we have given you an excellent example in Muhammad. Like, kind of Muslims take this as dogma that, we need to, every time we find a new piece of evidence of something Muhammad did, we need to try and defend it. So if there's evidence that Muhammad did ethnic cleansing, for example, when he ordered
but now you're
Jews,
flogging a dead horse.
No, you did a bit of flogging yourself, so I think you should allow me as well.
Yeah, but I agree with you that we defend the Prophet, and I agree with you that...
Then you'll end up defending. Then you'll end up defending
let me just finish off the.
Then you'll end up defending ethnic cleansing as well, because that's something else that Muhammad did.
I'm going to go for it, yeah.
And I'll prove it. Easy, and that's so easy to prove. That's even easier than. It's just as easy to prove that Muhammad did ethnic cleansing as it is to prove that he practiced slavery.
So James,
there's one more point though.
But I did let you speak for a while.
So and I let you speak for a while as well. But
okay, do you want to continue?
The one more point is that
go on.
You often use the term like, you the white man, we the brown man. Like, skin color is irrelevant in this discussion.
No, it's not irrelevant.
It is irrelevant.
No, it's not irrelevant when you have 400 years of black slavery.
No, it's irrelevant in this discussion. No, it is.
It's not irrelevant.
It's about the ideas.
It was all about skin color when it came to slavery. Of course, it's relevant on the scale.
When I said
how can we have a
Western countries?
James.
Don't
say it's irrelevant.
Listen to the whole point.
Don't say it's irrelevant.
When I said that Western countries persuaded Muslim countries to finally abolish slavery,
it didn't persuade anyone. They didn't persuade it. They were colonizing
that's
them.
what happened.
They were colonizing them.
They made an organization
1920s
to abolish slavery.
I think, James...
Don't interrupt me, man.
No, but I've let you speak for some time, James.
The point is that
go ahead,
even if those Western countries were black, or even if those Western countries were purple, it would be the same difference. So there isn't that much point in mentioning
James,
white and black unless you want to like arouse kind of like tribalistic mentality, or like
James, if you don't mind,
arouse the crowd, play the crowd, and
I'm
say,
not trying to play the crowd.
Oh, you the white man, oh, you the this and that.
Okay, so do you mind if I come back and answer you, right?
Yeah, okay.
So you made a few good points, and I want to answer some of them, right? The first thing that you said was that we don't have to defend personalities like John Locke or Immanuel Kant or John Stuart Mill or Voltaire or Montesquieu or whoever you want. Yeah? And I agree with you that you're not obliged as a liberal to do that. However, what you have to understand is that within liberalism, there are principles. And those principles tell us what's possible, what's probable, what's conceivable. Now, what I mean by that is that in contractarian liberalism, the idea of a social contract is central. Okay, so the idea that was first promoted by Thomas Hobbes in the Leviathan, and the idea that you have a mass population that cede legitimacy to a sovereign master who then can universalize a law. Now, this is a principle of liberalism. In fact, you could go as far as to argue that without this social contract, liberalism would not exist.
Okay.
No, I've let you speak for some time, so let me tell you why. The reason why is because, of course, if you don't have a government with legitimacy and a mandate, from a liberal perspective, then it could easily fall into anarchy, right? So it will change ideology, because anarchy is a distinctive ideology to liberalism. So from that perspective, I'm not quoting John Stuart Mill, or say for instance John Locke, who was the founding father of liberalism, to show you, look how bad his ideas were, and therefore look what you're trying to defend. No, I'm showing you his principles, which are agreed upon by almost every other contractarian liberal that came after him. So if you consider yourself a liberal and you're espousing human rights values, which of course are an extension of the liberal project, then you have to then you have to accept that there are principles which allow for your ideology to churn out certain net results. So for instance, the case of, I've made this case before about apostasy, yes? When I said that John Locke said that when you can kill an apostate, yes, you can kill, if it was a Christian country, you can, or a Jewish country for example, you can kill an apostate because the country is known in that way, and it's not seen as an illiberal thing to do, to kill an apostate from that perspective. I'm not saying that that's John Locke's view and therefore all liberals think that. I'm saying that John Locke reckoned principally based on the abstract principles of liberalism, and in particular social contract theory, which almost, like I said, all the contractarians believe in, that such a death penalty for apostasy is conceivable through liberalism. And I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying slavery, colonialism, and all of those things, it should not be assumed, because here's the narrative that has to be shut down straight away. The narrative is you have human rights, and you've mentioned the human rights document, human rights like the freedom of religion, the freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Let me tell you something very important. This is very important, James, and I want you to remember it for the rest of your life.
Okay,
honestly,
right.
I want you to...
I probably will.
Okay, listen to me very carefully, right? This is a Western, yes, it's romanticization. And I'll tell you why. When you say you have freedom of expression, or when the West says to us you have freedom of religion, or whatever it may be, speech, yeah? In what context is it the case? I will tell you the liberally conceivable concept. The extent to which we have freedom of religion, expression, and faith or speech is the extent to which the liberal government, through social contract, determines what is the acceptable freedom of expression, what is the acceptable freedom of speech, and what is the acceptable freedom of religion. That is why it was conceivable for the greatest liberal minds to say atheists shouldn't be in our society, like John Locke said. The reason why he said that was more to do with his own personal views than with more to do with the principles of liberalism itself than his own personal views. Therefore, going back to the idea of slavery, you're saying that you have these articles, which are the 30 articles written in 1948 about human rights. I'm saying to you that despite those articles, it's still conceivable and possible and probable that within a liberal framework, abstractly and in action, as we have seen through history, that you can have slavery and colonialism and exploitation and so on. It's not against liberalism. Therefore, if you're coming to say to me, look, here's the trajectory, you know, these Muslim countries have been forced. The reason why Muslim countries in the 1900s may have been forced to do anything is because in 1904, a few Western countries owned 85% of the world. They were the slaves themselves. Of course, so this is the irony of all ironies. You're saying that the Western countries forced Muslims to free slaves. They had them as slaves. This is the most ridiculous.
At the same time, though.
Yes, at this time. You said 1920. I'm saying that there was colonized